Okay, I'll switch to English because I made the slides in English and I always kind of, try to translate some things to Czech. So hopefully this is not awkward. So yeah, hi, I'm Klára. As Martin said, I work in Sentinel-1, which is enterprise cybersecurity company. I'll explain what that means. And I thought that I would use this angle to also explain what it means that I work in a platform UX team, which is slightly different to traditional product/UX design. I do that too, but our team has a bit of specialization. And I also want to talk about how the designers' work is changing with all of the new AI capabilities. A small disclaimer, I made the slides in Cloud Design slide deck mode because I wanted to try it out. It was a very fun journey that we can talk about after the presentation, and I hope that I don't find any bigger surprises there. One of the surprises is that it put 14th of April 2026. I only noticed when just before I left the office, and I was too afraid to ask it to change it to May because sometimes it removed something in other slides randomly as well. So I know that it's May. That's the first note. The other note is that we're a cybersecurity company. So we are very secure. I want to say demure as well. But I don't have many screenshots. I will have an official marketing demo that's available on our public website. That's all I can show you images perspective-wise. But hopefully, hopefully there's some useful content even without the pictures in the slides. As I said, I'm Klára. I work as a staff product designer. And I'm also a board member at Asociace UX, Useful Info. We have the Association of UX Association. You can join us for UX Mondays. You can join us for other events, very fun. And before Sentinel, I worked at Oracle on another enterprise product called Visual Builder, which is like an IDE, like an environment where you can adjust Oracle's applications. And before that, I was at Netera, that's the big Czech agency, and I worked for different clients across different industries. So I've seen things. So hopefully what I'll be saying will be making some sense. And here's the little agenda for today. So obviously I'll explain what Sentinel-1 actually does. I'll talk about how the UX team at this quite large company is roughly structured. I'll also, as I promised, I'll talk about the platform UX specifically. I'll talk about how kind of the enterprise/SaaS UX differs from that kind of traditional UX when we try to, do all of the processes and making things pretty and discoverable. That's slightly different. I'll also talk about what are the specifics of working, or like what are kind of the specific angles that we're looking at in cybersecurity UX. I'll talk about how AI is changing the work, and there are some closing thoughts at the end. So the company. This is like half marketing statement, but we're AI-native security platform for protecting endpoints, cloud environments, identities, data, and AI-related infrastructure. What it means in human words, imagine antivirus installed on many different devices, many other kind of network and not really network-related devices sending a lot of log data. And what we're building is platform for all of that. So it's not like the traditional, only the antivirus that you may know from your own computers. We're actually like the whole platform. And the product that the UX is designing is actually, among others, I'll also talk about the personas, but we kind of unify the data, and it's for analysts and other personas to observe the whole organizations, the whole enterprise scale. So it's not like the end user antivirus you may know, but it's like, huge B2B security platform, actually. It was founded in 2013. It's traded as S, That's pretty cool. We have just that single letter. If you open your stock stock app, we're the S there, and we have over 11,000 customers. Who uses the product? I have the customers at another slide. That's the fun thing with the AI generated slides. I didn't notice. Anyway, who is using the product? So I already mentioned analysts, and actually there's different types of analysts. They're in 3 tiers. The tier 1 analyst triages the alerts. Alerts is like kind of this, a security incident might have happened kind of notification that we surface in the product. And they triage whether it's something worth investigating and dealing with, or whether it's just some noise that the product, the platform triggered, and they don't have to deal with it. If they're not sure, they essentially escalate it to the higher tiers. So if the tier 1, kind of the most junior analyst, isn't sure, they escalate it to tier 2. They do a bit of deeper investigation, and even if they are not sure, they escalate it further to the tier 1. Then there's threat hunters, but it's usually, sometimes it's the tier 3 analysts. I hope that I'm not wrong, but I should know these things. The threat hunters are kind of people who are looking for the incidents before they got triggered as those alerts. They kind of proactively look into the data, into the logs, and they are trying to search for any kind of weird behavior and prevent the attacks before they spread and happen. Then there's actually, as I said, there's also other personas, like detection engineer, which are people who kind of tune the system, who create rules and policies inside of the platform that we're building for them that prevent incoming noise, that actually kind of set up, for example, the bespoke rules for that specific organization, what they want to watch for, what they want to trigger those security alerts for. There's obviously also the managers of the SOC team, because the tier 1 to 3 analysts are usually organized in SOC team, like Security Operations Center team, and the product needs to work for the managers too. And finally, there's also there's actually other personas as well, like for example the other managers in the companies. How it this was still kind of a rough introduction into an enterprise cybersecurity product per se, but what is kind of the business angle of it, how we kind of compete against each other. By the way, the competitors include CrowdStrike. When we are not recording, I will tell you how you know CrowdStrike. You've heard of CrowdStrike. Microsoft Defender, obviously a big one, kind of embedded into the Microsoft infrastructure, Palo Alto Networks, and we have many others. There's a lot of startups and and how we differ are kind of, the things like the detection quality itself, the number of false positive. Obviously, we kind of try to reduce the noise that comes to the product like ours. So the less noise, the better among the competitive market. Then there's also like AI, and I called it operational fit. So the platforms kind of need to be easily embedded into the existing ID infrastructure. It needs to connect well. It needs to connect well even to kind of those operational services, like, the Salesforce, Jira's, and stuff like that. It needs to fit the workflows of the teams. And also, it just kind of needs to have this kind of proof of concept in long term. It just needs to have this reputation of just working and being reliable. So that's kind of how we compete. Now finally, the customers, like among the 11,000, some that you may know, is, for example, Canva. We are predicting Canva. We are predicting Aston Martin. By the way, we have also NASA. I wanted to change it on the slide. We have also NASA, like our CEO congratulated the crew that landed on behalf of the company. That was very nice. We can be really proud. So yeah, we're like, although you may not be experts on enterprise SaaS cybersecurity, we are not really a no-name. We're actually, I'm proud to work at Sentinel-1. Just to mention, we kind of course, I'm a UX designer. I deal with UI, and of course, kind of the UI is kind of the surface of all of the things that I described. Of course, it needs to have very good infrastructure backend, the different detection engines. It's like a very huge platform. The UI sits kind of on the top of it. And apart from the product itself, just to mention that, it's kind of not the only thing that we do. We have also what's called MDR, Managed Detection and Response Service, which is like human colleagues that are behind the service, that they kind of extend the security teams of other companies. They're like our internal Sentinel-1 experts who work for many clients, who kind of extend their teams and watch their alerts as well. And also apart from that, we also have like huge research. Of course, like cybersecurity is kind of a domain on its own. So we have our own researchers who study the attacks, how they are performed. They also, for example, help create the detection rules, and that's a big part of what we do as well. And by the way, we are partners, of course, with Google on the threat intelligence, and we also partnered up with Anthropic because they're big on cybersecurity now as well, right? So I talked a lot. Now to show you something that gives you some idea how the UI looks like. You can actually kind of try it out yourself. You can head to websites of Sentinel-1 that will give you also some idea what we do. And there's also different articles on the different aspects of cybersecurity. But there's also these product tours. So this looks kind of, not boring. It's not boring. But this is like one of the very typical views, the alert view. You can see that there's things like, some process 7Z, that's the archiving tool, detected as malware. You see that it has some target assets. So, this is the machines that it was detected on. And what the analysts do all day is that they go through these alerts, and they are deciding whether they're false or true positives. They kind of decide it based on some detail. Of course, if they need more detail, the UI needs to help them uncover more and more and give the context of what happened. And this is how they decide. Yeah, you can also visualize. No, I don't want this. It covers, this, not ideal. But they can explore things in graphs. There's this whole thing where they can search the logs. It gives different tools. It looks like very plain UI, but the logic behind it is far from plain. Now we'll get a sense of how the UI looks like. Of course, this is marketing demo. In the real life product, there's thousands and thousands of the alerts. In this filter bar area, there's actually many different filters. We have even quite a few views over here. So this is like very simplified. I unfortunately cannot show you more than is on our public website, but it's kind of not the main point of what I'll be talking about. I rather want to talk about what the job is actually like, so you have some idea if you go work to enterprise. I'll return to the presentation. So, okay, about the UX team. So hopefully I gave you some idea what the cybersecurity or like what the enterprise cybersecurity product is about roughly. So like how the UX behind it works. Obviously, this is not anything new or something that you wouldn't heard of. but to mention it here, we have a huge design team. I think that I can check the Slack channel, kind of the general Slack channel of UX, but I hope that it's about, we have 55 members in our Slack channel, and it's consisted of these people, designers. We have a huge research team as well, actually, that has some good reputation in UX community, like our Sentinel-1, that we have a huge research team. We have a very good research team, and actually Sentinel-1 works with research very heavily and relies on it, which is, I think it's very above the standard. We also have dedicated content designers who are really focusing on standardizing the copy from microcopy to messages, and even kind of the larger piece, like any text that is in the UI, because the text is just the UX as well, and especially in such a data-heavy product like ours. And then we also have technical writers, which is something slightly different, although they do the content design as well. But their main concern is writing documentation. In enterprise, documentation is really important. Like, enterprise software isn't supposed to be something that you just get the first time you get there. There's actually a lot of things that you have to learn with it, and without documentation, it just simply wouldn't exist. So our technical writers make the UX as well. And obviously, what I always add is that UX is done by all of the company. We're at university premises, so you had to have heard of Nielsen and Norman, and as we know, UX is essentially the whole experience with a company. So of course, UX is also determined by the quality of the implementation by the PMs. But this is roughly the structure of kind of the dedicated UX org. What do we work with? I will have the dedicated section on AI, but to mention it here, yes, we work with Figma, but also as UX students, Figma has never been kind of the core of the work at all. That's just one of the many tools that is being kind of sunset as we speak. Hope that I am not making some false prophecy, but of course, Figma is useful for us to document stuff, to kind of align on things and annotate what we do. But in the past year, we are really heavily switching to AI prototyping. That's just very fast to make and to get alignment on. And what's also nice about the AI is that we can also make kind of our own tools to that we need for our work. For example, I built a plugin in Chrome that lets us test new themes. You saw that the UI was kind of plain, so we hope that I'm not NDAing something, but we have a tool that allows us to tweak the CSS a little bit. I can show you the tool, not on our product, but so that you get a sense. So this is what I built with anti-gravity. And essentially, it allows me to inject, can you see the difference? It allows me to inject CSS into site. So I can tweak any website visually. So I kind of use that principle to tweak the visual treatment of the console, together with my colleagues, of course. And inside, it's consisted of CSS snippets that I can individually turn on and off. And this is amazing when you want to really experiment. And actually, even in UX research, it's super cool that we can just toggle things on and off and see how the users react to it. And yeah, AI just allows you to build a tool that you need if the existing are not perfect. So this is like pretty nice. Yeah, next chapter. So what is this platform UX? I skipped the team. Yeah, I wanted to say that the designers are actually usually assigned to different parts of the products. I'm myself assigned to a couple of them, and it's the case for many other colleagues as well. But very roughly, we even have some kind of internal separation where some of my colleagues are focusing on what we call the analyst experience. So really kind of the workflow smoothness, the right data surfaced and such things. Then we have colleagues who are more on, for example, kind of the cloud infrastructure side and AIC, which means like working with the data itself. And then we have the platform that kind of, and what I will talk about next, that kind of spreads across, that builds the universal patterns that other designers can use and that can be also shared for different areas in the product. So more on that now. So what we mean by the platform UX is that, as I say, we build the platform, we build the Lego, not just the Lego, but we build the basis on top of which other things work and other people design on. So what we do a lot is researching existing interaction patterns in the console, and me and my colleagues are often standardizing them so that the experience is consistent across different workflows. I'm not talking just about, it also includes design system. I'm sure that you already heard about design systems and components by this point, but there's not only components, there's also larger patterns and kind of the general ways of how we work with certain concepts inside of the console. So that is our concern. And what's interesting about the job is that every change we make really kind of imprints in several areas, and they can either improve them or worsen them. The ideal is that they make them consistent and predictable. And it's kind of less of the bespoke. It's not like that we do user research on a very particular thing, but we need to standardize kind of breadth of things and figure out universal thing. I can give an example. I can show the example, but I myself am not that much working on the design system side, but I've been working on this half new interaction pattern, somewhat inspired by the little windows that you either have for LinkedIn chats or when you open a new email in Gmail, you have it in this little window in the right bottom of the corner and they can stack. So we kind of, for example, reuse this pattern to allow analysts to see multiple objects like alerts or some, endpoint by endpoint, we mean like a laptop, someone's laptop, side by side and having them collapsible. And I had to adapt it to our particular product with some, special features on its own. So the work was, for example, about researching how this particular pattern works in the other products like the Gmail or LinkedIn. I also took a look at how it worked. We had kind of a legacy UI, so I had to study how particularly it worked there. And I had to learn from all of that and kind of not invent, but define our own take on this particular interaction pattern so that it works inside of our own console. I know that does it make some sense, roughly? Hopefully. Thanks for nodding. That does help. For us, it's the standards first, very often, and then with the little deviations that are kind of the devil in the detail, but it's very specific and it's different to the product design, and I can say because I do both. Now, so I talked about how platform design is slightly different to the traditional product design that is really focused on the particular business value, particular workflow, particular use case. I also want to talk about how the enterprise design differs to what I think design is usually taught for. Like if you look at all of the UX boot camps and stuff and all of the nice theories about double diamonds and design thinkings and making everything discoverable and not too much information. How this is different? Because I like actually this subline, because designing software people live in for 8 hours is different from designing software that you open once, and totally different from, for example, making websites that need to convert. That's a totally different story. So first of all, the ergonomics matter much more than the first impression. If you opened, for example, the particular product feature area that I work on, people are usually, oof, that's way too much data. Couldn't it be less? Wouldn't it be more useful? And I say, no, in my particular case, it wouldn't. Like, my users would hate me if I add, a pixel of white space to a row, because it adds too many pixels on the vertical side of the screen. They would see less raw rows of the data, and they would complain to me. So, like, a thing like this is super different. So it's not kind of the delight at the first sight, but the actual usefulness and for the extended period of use. And that kind of relates to another thing. I'm not sure how many of you already work in some UX teams, but oftentimes, a UX research report would say, yeah, people didn't find this button. And again, it's not necessarily bad. This is enterprise SaaS, and it needs to surface a lot of things and hide way more other things. And you just simply cannot surface everything, and you have to curate it. What is important, though, that it's findable or learnable, and that the things that you need very often are actually surfaced, and the things that you don't need that many often are available in some menu in a logical place. But when someone tells me we need to surface that button, I ask a lot of questions. And finally, in enterprise software, more than in any other software, I guess, well, I think this is important even if you're building a like B2C application, like, I don't know, music player or whatever. But you do need to know the data model. And I think this is not stressed enough in many UX courses. But you have to know not only kind of the user stories and, in whichever format you wanted the job to be done, use case, whatever. That's one side of the story. But you also need to know the world that you work with. So what entities exist, kind of what kinds of objects, what are their relationships, and also kind of the cardinalities. By cardinalities, I mean the amounts. It's like, imagine Spotify. Spotify's interface would be different if it could play 5 songs, whereas where it has, 1,000, maybe millions of songs inside. That's a simplistic example, but the amounts matter a lot. That you shape the decisions about the UI based on that. And also, if you don't kind of understand the relationships in the world that you're designing for, then you may end up designing screens that fit well a particular workflow, particular scenario, step by step. It does make sense for the individual steps. But when you're building another part of that UI and you don't actually know what you, for example, created with such a process, you start losing it. So oftentimes the most useful UX work is even kind of the prep work of mapping out the objects and its relationships before you start even thinking about the use cases. Because you kind of need to know what you can do with the objects. In our case, it means we have to know what you can do with the alerts. For example, the alerts are being marked as false or true positive. And you need to know that abstracted of the user for the UI to make sense across different screens and different workflows. Yeah?
What methods do you use for this?
What
methods do you use for the relations of the...
Mm-hmm. I always like to say that the particular method doesn't matter that much. A simple diagram is enough. If you want some academic literature, then in Kim Goodwin, Designing for the Digital Age, she has her own method of having the table where you have the objects listed with their possible attributes, the cardinalities and stuff. And another buzzword, actually I have it in the last slide, but thanks for the question, it's completely fair and in place here. Another very popular model is OOUX, Object-Oriented UX, which is kind of a UX simplification of object-oriented programming, but it doesn't matter what particular format you use. What's important is knowing kind of what the objects are, so I don't know, songs, what attributes they can have, so I don't know, like name, interpret, duration, and stuff like that. Those are attributes. And then you also somehow in a diagram, doesn't matter the format, you should be able to say that, I don't know, songs can be organized. Can be organized is already the name of the relationship, can be organized in albums. And then, you know, album is another object. And the object album has, again, name, interpret, contributing artists, whatever, and so on and so forth. And the method is usually even kind of starting from this story about the world, where you highlight the what's that name, announce, and you also somehow differently you highlight what you say about them. So, for example, songs can be organized in albums, and then you also, for example, add the cardinalities. So it's kind of useful to know that albums have, I don't know, now I'll just shoot it, but like, again, the UI is kind of built around the idea that album has, like, I don't know, a couple of tens of songs, but albums don't typically have 100 songs. Then the Spotify would look slightly different again. Do these ideas make sense? Cool. So yeah, and finally, so I'm trying to get down on the specificity. So what's specific about cybersecurity UX? So our kind of top metric ruling them all is what we call MTTR, mean time to respond. So obviously in security, ideal is catching the attack before it even happens. Of course, once it's not like that an attack happens in a second. We have these whole concept of attack paths. So, you know, attackers usually find kind of the entry point where they invade in your environment, and then they kind of search for the next hops until they reach something actually valuable. So I don't know, they find some weak password there, they hop through this server, until they get, I don't know, for example, to credentials. So, you know, kind of user logins and passwords or something like that. That's a very rough example of an attack path. But for the analysts, the mean time to respond is the time between the signal, which is usually the alert, to the moment they actually did something about it. So they contained it somehow. So if there's an alert and it looks like that, I don't know, my laptop is being compromised, the mean time to respond would be till the moment that analyst just kills my computer and disconnects it from network. I hope that I said that right. I will fact check it and eventually we'll cut it out. But it's like the time to respond to the signal. And now it's very hard to make everything you can for that in the UI. And what is kind of the biggest challenge, like kind of going against this, is what's called alert fatigue. And alert fatigue means the kind of the noise that you have to deal with. The analysts see thousands of those alerts, like those little signals they have to think or do something about. And our job is to reduce this alert fatigue by really only showing, and it's not only UXers' job, but of course the UI has an impact on this too. But even on the kind of the lower layers side, we need to make sure that we only that we don't trigger alert for every single thing that happens. You know, if we triggered an alert every time someone clicks a file, that would be just impossible to manage. So yeah, the alert fatigue is one of the challenges that we have, one of the most important. So reducing kind of the signal to noise ratio. And finally, what is a very important task of the UI is providing enough trust. So the alert is something we're saying, hey, something wrong might be happening based on some of our, according to our detection engines, our detection rules and stuff like that. And when the analyst is investigating that alert, whether, to mark it as a false or true positive and then having to do something about it, they first need to know the reason why our system, why Sentinel-1 systems detected it as an alert in the first place. So kind of the reasoning behind it. And at the same time, it needs to provide enough context in case the analysts require it. So we surface kind of just enough data, for example, in the basic alert detail view that we saw in the demo, so that the analysts can, at least the level 1 analyst should be able to decide whether they mark it as a false positive or they escalate it. But the higher tier analysts need to have tools inside of the console to get broader picture of what could be happening. And we have multiple tools for that. But all of that is kind of about building the trust and knowing the context of why we triggered something as the alert. That's kind of it for talking about the specifics of our work. Now to the more general side and a bit of philosophing here. How is AI affecting our job? Why I have this section here is because a couple of years ago, typical UXer, like memes would be, someone by the whiteboard sketching, or, when Figma came, making maybe first wireframes in Figma, and then, pixel pushing the pixel perfect UIs in the Figma, and then testing them, and then handing them off to development to kind of copycat the already almost pixel perfect design to not end it up like that anyway. But what was nice about a bit of context to this, why I think Figma was so popular, because it was kind of the best tool for the job of making UIs in this time frame, so to say. Because it was, for me at least, it was kind of the sweet spot between the high fidelity, kind of the pixel perfect preview of the UI that you're building, and kind of the speed and easiness of making it. And it was kind of close enough to how UIs actually work with the auto layout and the stretching. You could see a bit how the UI is actually built. And it was also making it easy to just connect a few screens for user testing. It was usually just enough to know whether, some screen order is logical, whether, the content is right, and so on. But what Figma sucked at was anything more complicated than that. Like, again, I talked about the ergonomy a lot, and you yourself as users of many digital products, that the little micro interaction and the delight that comes out of how it actually behaves and responds to you is really crucial. And making some advanced interactions in Figma was not that great. We could have the philosophical debate on why I think it didn't matter that much that it couldn't do input fields. But yeah, even like input fields, you couldn't do input fields in Figma, and that was limiting for sure in many scenarios as well. There was also a tool of Axure, I'm not called Axure. Martin remembers it. I sadly also remember it. I never liked it. I actually hated it to my guts because even before AI, I thought it was way easier to just code it than to try to click it in Axure. But so just so you know, just as a fun historical fact, there was Axure where you could make some interactions by clicking and wiring up the logic. But anyway, with AI, yay, the world is just different, not gonna lie. The first thing that I mention here is that now even a PM can build that interactive prototype. They never learned with Figma. I wouldn't want them to, but they can just quickly scaffold something that has roughly the content and roughly the structure and roughly the interaction that they want. And even if I say that it makes no sense from a perspective of interaction or UI design, I at least get what they want to build, and we start the conversation sooner. And sometimes, very often, it's actually very useful base we can build upon. And we don't have to wait for each other to start that conversation. And of course, other people can too. I actually saw users making, little prototypes of what they'd like to see. Also, actually amazing. That was kind of that's why I mentioned the Figma. Another thing is the fidelity in the interaction. Figma had its limit, and of course, before Figma, the Axure had limits, and coding something by hand is the most expensive thing. That's why we have UX, to kind of avoid sending to engineers something that is not useful. We can make in high fidelity interaction prototypes now, even if they don't always look exactly like the end product in terms of the components used. Actually, even that already happens, but I can kind of build a wireframe that has the specific interaction that I need, though. So when I explained that I worked on that pattern with the little windows, actually my prototype, it was like a year ago, last summer, when the models weren't that advanced yet. But I could build a pretty good prototype that still demonstrated the interaction very well. Like each click, each key shortcut modifier, everything was there. And I would never make it in Figma. They were also reorderable and resizable and stuff like that. Many things that Figma couldn't do and I can do now. Another way how AI is helping tremendously is that it's just so easy to summarize context now, and from across different places. So AI can, when I am digging into a new problem, I can summarize all of the context from Jira, from Confluence, like the knowledge base. But I also actually often search for how certain decisions were made by actually also searching for different Slack conversations and tracking down how a certain decision was made. That would be also kind of brain fuck 2 years ago, and I can do that now. So that awesome. I already talked about the plugin. I can just make my own tools if they don't exist, and I hope that I already tried 3 times. It's not accepted to Chrome Web Store yet, but I hope that it's there someday for other people to use as well. I even I had 2 pull requests merged. Does anyone know what a pull request or merged means? Some of you know. For those who don't, I actually made little adjustments directly in the production code, and I submit it for review to the developers, and they say, yeah, it's not such an AI rubbish. We can actually merge it into the actual main code, and it's actually, you know, up and running. Something that I made, with the models is actually up and running, but it has limitations. I've already seen UX talks on, yeah, like designers can already just do it in the production code and ship it. In some startups, in some smaller companies where the front-end engineers still sit and back-end engineers sit, you know, by the same table, and it's all safe environment. Maybe we're definitely not there yet. Like anything more complex than some cosmetic or kind of mostly CSS-related changes, once it touches upon the logic, although I have engineering background, it's kind of out of my control that it adheres to all of the code standards that we have in the enterprise. So for us, it's not the reality maybe yet, but definitely it's not the reality yet. So yeah, but I wanted to flex that, you know, I did touch the production code. Other than that, we mostly work actually with our own, we call it a mock of our product. So it's like a very lightweight front-end simulation of how our UI looks like. And there we can, you know, build anything that we want, like prototype any new feature, just widely experiment there, which would be highly impractical to do on top of the kind of main production code repository anyway. So this is like where we mostly do our prototyping. Kudos to my manager and friend who is maintaining this mock. And yeah, last note is that this is kind of dated already. This is kind of the reality as of now, May 2026. It was much more wild last summer when I was making the prototype of that interaction pattern. I was making it in V0. Does anyone remember V0 now? Not even a year later? Not really. Sorry, V0. No, we need to cut that out. They were our partners. Or we were in a POC. I don't know. We'll cut this out. But yeah, we were working with Figma Make for long as well, and Figma Make was our primary tool for some months. And now we advanced again, and now we are actually working with the actual code, Cloud Code. And yeah, we're like every 2 months it changes. I would still use Figma Make 3 months ago, and today I really wouldn't. It has so many limitations. So yeah, it's changing, but I'm optimistic. What's still kind of applying principle here, and I like this slogan. I don't know who invented it. I like to think that it's kind of my way of saying that, is the right amount of fidelity. And the right amount of fidelity, I'll explain what I mean by it, but it's something that I think people struggled with even before Azure, and which I think is not a topic in the UX community enough. But I've just seen so many people, ruminating about really things that don't matter for the things that they actually need to validate. If you need to validate visual design, then you need a prototype or a mock that is highly, that has high fidelity in the visual design, but it doesn't necessarily need to show realistic data because it's not what you're testing. You're testing the visual design. On the contrary, if you're validating either with users or your stakeholders the content shown, then on the contrary, you don't need the visuals at all. And you actually may purposefully use a wireframe because that forces the people that you need the feedback from to focus on what you're just validating, which is the content. And the content stands out from the wireframe better, and it puts the other things to the background. They don't disturb. And sometimes it's even about tweaking the wireframe. Wireframing on its own is a nice discipline because it allows you to simply put a gray rectangle on top of things that you don't want the people to focus on. And yeah, I think that it's not like, I'm kind of applying this laziness principles, which isn't laziness really, but it's kind of pragmatic approach where you do just enough when you do prototype that does just enough so that you validate the very idea that you're actually validating. It's philosophical, again, no picture, but I hope that it makes sense. And it applies to AI as well, where I see, I'm not saying that my colleagues, but in general designers, I often see how they're figuring out how to make their prototypes like one-to-one to the actual product. One-to-one will be just the production code, and if you do it on top of the production code and you handle the agent so that it actually adheres to design system and everything. But you don't need to do that when you're validating the idea. If you can build, if you can just quickly scaffold something, it's like wireframing with AI as well. You can just scaffold an AI prototype that shows exactly the thing that you're prototyping. Again, in my case, it roughly showed some of the content. It even didn't look like that, but what it was detailed in were the interactions that I described. And if I try to mimic everything else, it would be waste of effort. So yeah, it still applies that you don't have to do more work than you actually need to validate the idea, and you should focus on that idea. And other things that didn't change. Of course, we still need to get quality feedback from the user. The previous slide hinted my view on what is kind of requirement for quality feedback. Our UXR does that for us. We do like kind of both the concept testing, so very early validation that idea on its own is valid. And of course, once we are higher in the fidelity in terms of the visual and the interaction design, we also do the usability testing, which has its nuance that I also described, where it's not necessarily bad that people don't find it at first glance, but it's important that they can find it somehow. Of course, we and that's kind of an organizational thing, but of course, like as a designer in an enterprise, I still need to align with my stakeholders, of course, PM being a very important one, but also engineering managers and other different stakeholders. There's usually more of them. It's still important, and again, I think that I already kind of talked about it and it's not stressed enough, but it's very important to have not only shared understanding and handoff with the front end, but with the back end as well, because I already talked how important it is to understand the data model very early. Sometimes it's a bit of a hot potato method that I quickly sketch something, some kind of my understanding on the problem, but the sooner even backend engineers see it, they can figure out what APIs they need to make, how they actually implement the data model, how exactly they do it. And we can even think of it together. I don't think that, designers should work in solo. I designed many great ideas collaborating with both front-end and back-end engineers. I'm even like a facilitator and just kind of the buddy in this whole process. And as always, product designer, why, by the way, that's why kind of the rebrand from UX to product design happened, is that it's not only kind of designing the most user-friendly thing, but it's kind of the balancing between the business needs, the technical constraints too. That's also why you need to work with the engineers, and the user value. It's there too, but it needs to be kind of in the symbiosis with the other two. So the tools are changing, but the role itself and the added value is still there. And I'm optimistic that we are not, we still need to do good prompts and ask good questions. So finally, last 3 slides. Some kind of extra notes that I wanted to deliver here. And it was already kind of obvious. It's very crucial that you also know and educate yourself in the domain that you're designing for, that you don't just, blindly trust your PM that they know how this fits some context, but you actually know the users, you know the domain, you know what they do, they know what they look at. When I started in Sentinel-1, one of the most, some of the most important and useful things for me was long sessions with our most experienced designer who's worked in other cybersecurity companies, but most preciously, I also sat with my analyst friends who just showed me how they work. I sat beside them. It's a slightly different experience than UXR that is usually more controlled, or like it's also UXR. It's like ethnographic, the ethnographic research of a sort. But just being with them and watching them taught me a lot, and just affects how I think of my design decisions every day. And it's also just what I really appreciate is that we have a huge database of the past UX research in Dovetail. We have recordings of people working with that product, and it's useful to watch it even if it's not directly on some of your topics, just, having that kind of contextual inquiry. Yeah, contextual inquiry, that's the term, the good term as well. Just having the contextual inquiry of seeing people interact with all of the things and commenting, oh, this bothers me all the time and stuff like that. Also extremely crucial, and you never know when you actually correlate it to something else that you're thinking about. And yeah, I have a very strong belief in this, and this is the AI quote, but I kind of like it, that the best ideas come from understanding a workflow well enough to know which step the user would skip if they could. And in the cybersecurity world, every click, every pixel, every screen, every row hidden in the day, because they deal with hundreds of the alerts in a day. And even if it's just one extra click, a lot of extra clicks in a day do count. So that's very important to realize. I also like this quote. It kind of touches upon the data, and it's actually my skip manager, Vladimir. And he told me that yesterday at the dinner, hoping I'd quote him, but I said yes, I would, because I do like that quote, that a good design happens at the back end, because without the collaboration on having the world, as I said, the conceptual world described well enough, you just won't have the good UI to reflect that design. The design that happens in the concept itself is actually where the real stuff happens, and the UI is kind of the cherry on top. And you can't have good UI without shared and good understanding of the data model. And something that I learned at Oracle, it was actually officially called that way, clarity of purpose and shape of data. It's kind of the closing thoughts, and it's very obvious, but it doesn't hurt to just say it out loud. You do need to know why exactly you're doing something, what it exactly is for, whose problem is it, of course, the persona, what their success looks like. And if you can't say that, it doesn't even make sense to think about something. And the often forgotten part, the second part, the shape of data, knowing what the objects are, how many of them there are, and maybe even the times, how long individual things take. All of these data, all of these factual statements about the world also shape how the UI looks like, and that's kind of what I'd end this with. Don't focus only on the nice workflows, but on the world that you're designing as well. And that's it. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you a lot.